The moment Clara Hennessy stepped off the stagecoach into the dust-choked town of Red Rock, Texas, in the spring of 1882, she had already made up her mind that she would never let another man close enough to break her again. The town greeted her with the smell of horse dung and dry earth, with the distant hammering of a blacksmith and the laughter of men spilling out of a saloon that had no business being open at 10 in the morning. She pulled her trunk off the top of the coach herself, not waiting for assistance, not meeting the eyes of the driver who offered his hand. Her jaw was set. Her brown eyes were dry. Whatever softness had once lived in Clara Hennessy had been buried in a churchyard in Missouri 6 months prior, next to a man named Thomas, who had taken her heart and her savings and her trust, and had given her nothing in return but a funeral she was expected to weep at graciously. She had wept. Lord, had she wept. But that was Missouri, and this was Texas, and she had come here to take over her late uncle's small farm plot on the edge of town, work the land, grow what she could, sell the rest, and ask absolutely nothing from the world except to be left alone. The town of Red Rock was not large, but it had the bones of something trying to be. There was a general store, a post office, a church with a crooked steeple, a livery stable, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and a scattering of homes and businesses along a main street that still turned to mud when it rained. The surrounding land was flat and dry, and honest in the way that flat and dry land tends to be, making no promises it could not keep. Clara arranged her affairs with the land office, a sweating little man named Mr. Pratt who kept adjusting his spectacles and looking at her as though women arriving alone with trunks and deed papers were an unusual species. She supposed they were. She did not much care. The farm was 2 miles east of town, down a packed dirt road that wound between mesquite and scrub oak. It was not a beautiful property. The house was small and needed work. The roof had a soft patch over the kitchen, the well needed to be cleared, and the fields had gone fallow since her uncle had fallen ill 2 years back. But it was hers, completely and entirely hers, and that, Clara decided, was the most beautiful thing she had encountered in a very long time. She spent her first week hauling, scrubbing, mending what she could, and making a list of what she could not mend alone. The list was longer than she would have liked. The fence line along the south pasture was down. The plow needed a new iron share. She had no horse of her own, having spent nearly all her traveling money on the stage and the supplies she had brought with her. She was going to need help, and the acknowledgement of that fact sat in her chest like a stone. It was on her 8th morning in Red Rock that she met Cole Danner. She had walked the 2 miles into town herself, her boots raising small puffs of dust with each step, her list folded in her apron pocket, her hair pinned up severely as though it too had been worn to behave. She was coming out of the general store with a sack of flour over one shoulder and a paper parcel of nails under her arm when she walked directly into a solid wall of man and nearly lost both. He caught the flour before it hit the ground. His hands were large and scarred across the knuckles and quick in the way that only came from spending years working with animals that did not care about your timing. He straightened, holding the sack out to her, and she saw him properly for the first time. He was tall, somewhere around 30 years of age, lean but broad-shouldered in the way of a man who had never spent a day idle in his life. He wore a brown canvas coat over a blue chambray shirt, work pants tucked into battered boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better years. His face was weathered and honest, with a jaw that carried a few days of dark stubble and eyes the color of good creek water, somewhere between brown and green and constantly shifting. He had a small scar at the corner of his left brow, the kind that came from a childhood fall rather than a bar fight. He was, by any reasonable accounting, a handsome man. Clara noted this the way she might note the price of sugar, as a simple fact, and moved on. "Thank you," she said, taking the flour back. "You've got too much to carry," he said. It was not an insult. It was simply an observation, stated plainly. "I am aware of that," she said, and started walking. He fell into step beside her, which she had not invited but could not exactly prevent without causing a scene in the middle of Main Street. "You must be the woman who took over the Hennessy plot," he said. "I am Clara Hennessy," she said. "The plot belonged to my uncle, Cole Danner," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run cattle out of the spread just north of yours. Our fence lines run parallel for about a quarter mile." That, at least, was useful information. She glanced at him sideways. "Then you are aware that the south fence on my property is down?" "I noticed it," he said. "Was going to say something to whoever took over." He paused. "Some of my cattle have been grazing your land." She stopped walking. "Have they?" "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for that. I'll have my men put the fence right." He said it without flinching or making excuses, and she found that she respected that even if she did not show it. "I'll come by this week if that is agreeable." "It is agreeable," she said. "Good day, Mr. Danner." He tipped his hat and let her walk. She did not look back, but she noted, with some irritation, that she was aware of exactly when he turned and walked the other direction. He came on Tuesday with 2 hands from his ranch, a man named Big Pete who was exactly what his name suggested, and a wiry young Mexican cowboy named Ramon who had a quick smile and sang to himself while he worked. They put the south fence right in a single afternoon, and Cole worked alongside his men the entire time without directing from a distance. Clara brought out a pitcher of water and 3 cups mid-morning, set them on the fence post, and went back inside without ceremony. She watched from the kitchen window sometimes, telling herself she was checking their progress on her fence and not looking at the easy way Cole moved, the way he talked to his men, the fact that he laughed at something Ramon said and the laugh was genuine and unguarded. When they finished, he knocked on her door. "Fence is done," he said. "The post at the corner was rotted through, so we replaced it. There's a section on the north side that'll need attention before winter. If you want, I can note where." "I would appreciate that," she said. He told her. She wrote it down. He looked at her notepad and at her list, which was still quite long, and she saw him register what it contained, but he did not comment. "Anything else you need while we are here?" he asked. "No," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Danner." He went. She stood in her doorway and watched the 3 of them ride north along the fence line, and for the first time in months, she felt something that was not cold determination. Some small flicker of warmth that she immediately identified as the beginning of trouble and snuffed out accordingly. The weeks passed. Spring moved through Raydrock like a slow river, warming the earth in stages, drawing green up through the clay-heavy soil. Clara worked her land from first light to last, and she was stronger than she looked, as most people who had lived through genuine hardship tend to be. She cleared the south field. She got the plow repaired at the blacksmith. She bartered with Mr. Pratt at the general store, 2 jars of her blackberry preserves for a small credit, and she planted what she could with what she had. She learned the rhythms of Raydrock slowly and carefully, the way a person learns any new place when they are serious about staying. She learned that the Raydrock saloon on the left, Murphy's, was the rougher of the 2, and to avoid it after dark. She learned that the postmistress, a cheerful widow named Agnes Beaumont, knew everything that happened in town within the hour it happened. She learned that the sheriff, a man named Harlan Cross, was competent and fair, which was not something you could take for granted in a Texas town in 1882. She learned that Cole Danner was generally liked in Raydrock, that he had built his ranch from a small stake about 4 years ago, that he was known to be reliable and honest, and that he was not, as far as Agnes could determine with great investigative energy, attached to any woman in particular. Clara received this information from Agnes without comment and without encouraging its further provision. Cole came back 2 weeks after the fence repair, this time alone. He was leading a horse, a solid bay mare with a white blaze on her forehead and the kind of deep chest that spoke to endurance over speed. "I don't have anything to trade for a horse," Clara said, coming to the door before he could knock, having seen him from the window. "She's not for trading," he said. "She's a spare horse. She's been standing in my pasture eating my feed all winter. She'll work better if she's got something to do." He paused. "You need a horse. I have one not doing much, that's all this is." Clara looked at the mayor. The mayor looked back at her with calm, dark eyes. "I don't accept charity," Clara said. "Then call it a loan," he said. "Bring her back when you have something you'd rather ride. And if I never do, then I suppose she's yours," he said, and there was no manipulation in it, no angling, just plain speech. "Her name's Biscuit. She likes carrots and she doesn't like loud noises. She's easy otherwise." Clara came down off the porch and stood in front of the mare and put her hand against the animal's warm neck. Biscuit stood steady. "All right," Clara said. Cole nodded, handed her the lead rope, and started to turn his horse to leave. "Mr. Danner," she said. He turned back. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it fully, which surprised her. He rode away, and Clara stood with Biscuit in the spring afternoon, feeling something she could not quite name and was not ready to examine. It was Agnes Beaumont who first said what the town was beginning to think, which was Agnes's particular gift and occasional curse. She cornered Clara at the post office one morning in early May, under the guise of a package that had arrived, and while Clara was signing for it, Agnes said, with her particular brand of cheerful directness, "Cole Danner has been riding past your road an awful lot for a man whose business is to the north. Perhaps his cattle wander," Clara said. "Clara," Agnes said, with the tone of a woman who has been widowed twice and is therefore not easily deflected from observations about the living, "that man put your fence right on his own time, loaned you his best spare horse, and I heard from Pete Walters that he helped you clear your south field last week." "He sent his men to help with the field," Clara said. "I did not ask him to." "No," Agnes agreed. "He just did it." Clara folded the paper from her package carefully. "Agnes, I am not interested." Agnes studied her with wise, kind eyes. "You were hurt badly," she said, and it was not a question. "I was," Clara said. "By someone who did not deserve you," Agnes said. "By someone I thought I knew," Clara corrected quietly. Agnes patted her hand. "The thing about men like Cole Danner," she said, "is that you always know exactly where you stand with them. He's not complicated. He's not hiding anything. What you see is what there is." "I appreciate you telling me," Clara said, and she collected her package and walked out into the bright May morning, and she thought about what Agnes had said for the rest of the day, even though she tried very hard not to. She was mending harness leather on her porch that evening when she heard horse hooves on the road and looked up to find Cole riding toward her house, not past it. He pulled up at the porch rail and dismounted in a single easy motion. "Evening," he said. "Evening," she said. He stood with his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim, and she got the sudden impression that Cole Danner, who was easy and unguarded in most circumstances, was not entirely easy right now. "I was wondering," he said, "if you'd like to ride with me Saturday morning. There's a stretch of creek about 4 miles out where the wildflowers come in thick this time of year. It's worth seeing." Clara set down the leather. She looked at him for a long moment, this honest-faced cowboy with his hat in his hands and his creekwater eyes, and she felt the warmth again, that small dangerous flicker, and she felt the old warning rising up alongside it, the memory of Thomas's voice saying he loved her, of the way she had believed him completely, of what that belief had cost her. "Mr. Danner," she said carefully, "I want to be plain with you because I think you are a man who appreciates plain speech." "I am," he said. "I do not believe in love anymore," she said. "I did once. It cost me considerably. I came to Redrock to work my land and build something that belongs entirely to me, and I am not looking for what you appear to be offering." He did not look away. He did not look wounded or defensive. He simply absorbed what she had said, the way good earth absorbs rain, thoroughly and without resistance. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "All right." She thought that was the end of it, and she was already picking up the leather again, and then he said, "Give me 1 season." She looked up. His voice was quiet and steady, and he was holding her gaze with those shifting creekwater eyes. "Not to change your mind," he said. "Not to prove anything to you. Just 1 season. Let me show you what this country looks like in summer, what it feels like when things grow and get warm and settle into themselves. Let me be someone you can talk to, ride alongside, someone who is simply present and honest and does not ask you for more than you can give. 1 season. If at the end of it you feel the same way, I will respect that completely, and I will go on being your neighbor and nothing more, and I will not raise the subject again." She stared at him. No man had ever said anything like that to her. Thomas had said everything, promises and declarations and grand romantic speeches, and every one of them had been sand. This man was saying almost nothing, only asking to be present, and somehow that was more dangerous than anything Thomas had ever said. "Why?" she asked, and her voice came out less steady than she intended. "Because I have been watching you work this land for a month," he said simply, "and I have never seen anyone work the way you do, like the land is something you are in conversation with instead of something you are conquering. And because you are the most honestly sad person I have ever met, and sad is not the same as broken, and I do not think you are broken, and I think you might like to find that out too." The porch was very quiet. A mockingbird sang from the mesquite tree at the corner of the yard. "One season," she said. "That is all I am asking," he said. She picked up the leather again and went back to her mending and did not look at him. "Saturday morning," she said. "The wildflowers." She heard him put his hat back on. She heard the smile in his voice when he said, "I'll be here at 7." And then she heard him mount up and ride away, and she sat on her porch in the warm May evening and realized her hands were not quite steady, and she was not entirely sure what to make of that. He was there at 7 exactly, and Biscuit was already tacked and ready when he arrived, because Clara Hennessy was not a woman who needed to be waited on. They rode east first and then south along a dry creek bed that still held water in the shaded bends, and Cole talked about the land the way he talked about most things, practically, with details that were specific and earned. He told her where the clay got too heavy for planting, and where the soil was deep and generous. He told her about the seasons, about the storms that came up from the Gulf in summer, fast and green-skied and violent, and how the land responded to them, and about the dry spells in July and August when you had to be careful, and about the brief, brilliant autumn that fell over West Texas like a gift you had not expected. He did not talk about himself much, and she noticed this. When she asked him directly, carefully, the way she asked most things, how he had come to be in Red Rock with a cattle operation, he told her plainly. He had grown up in Arkansas, the son of a subsistence farmer who had died of fever when Cole was 15. He had worked cattle drives out of Abilene for 6 years, saving what he could, and had come to Texas with enough to buy a modest spread and build something. He had been in Red Rock 4 years. He had a good working relationship with 3 neighboring ranchers and a contract with a buyer in San Antonio. He was making it, not getting rich, but making it. "Were you ever married?" she asked, and then felt immediately that she had asked too directly. He did not seem bothered. "No," he said. "There was a woman in Abilene a long time ago. She married someone else." He said it without bitterness, just as fact. "I understood her reasons. Were you heartbroken?" Clara asked, and she was not sure why she kept pressing, except that she wanted to understand what kind of man he was. He considered this seriously, which she appreciated. "I was lonely for a while," he said. "That is different from heartbroken. Heartbroken means you believed in something completely and had it taken from you. I am not sure I had believed completely enough for it to be that." He glanced at her. "You know the difference?" "Yes," she said. "I do." They rode on, and then the creek bed opened into a wide, shallow flat, and she stopped breathing for a moment because the wildflowers were exactly what he had promised. More than that, they were extraordinary. The whole flat was covered in bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush and evening primrose, blue and red and pale yellow, thick as a quilt, shifting slightly in the warm morning breeze. Biscuit picked her way to the edge of the flat and stopped, and Clara sat on her horse in the middle of the Texas spring and felt something in her chest move, not break, not ache, but move, like a door shifting slightly on its hinges. "This is," she started and could not finish. "Yes," he said, and did not try to add to it, which was exactly right. They sat there in the flowers for a long time without talking much, and when they finally turned for home, she felt lighter than she had when they left, A small but measurable difference. June came in hot and purposeful. Clara's south field was planted and beginning to show green in earnest, and she was starting on the kitchen garden with a determination that impressed even Cole's ranch hand Ramon, who brought her a cutting of a particular type of pepper plant one morning, with the explanation that it grew well in the Redrock soil, and with a grin that suggested he found her enterprise admirable. She planted it, and it thrived. Cole came by twice a week now, sometimes with a purpose, a tool to borrow, information about weather, an update on the fence, and sometimes without one, just riding over in the late afternoon and sitting on her porch while she worked and talking about whatever presented itself. They talked about the political situation in Texas, about the railroads pushing west and what it meant for cattle drives, about the state of things for the former Confederacy, about the way land law still worked against Mexicans and native peoples in ways that were visible and unjust if you were paying attention, and Clara was always paying attention. She had opinions, and she expressed them, and Cole listened to them, pushed back when he disagreed, conceded when he did not. He treated her thinking as though it had the same weight as his own, and she found this so extraordinary that it took her several weeks to accept it as genuine. One hot Thursday afternoon, she was struggling with the water pump, which had developed a reluctance to draw that she could not resolve by herself. She was on her knees in the dirt with her sleeves rolled up and her hair coming loose from its pins when she heard Cole's horse and looked up. He was coming across the yard at a trot, saw her situation, and dismounted before he had even fully stopped, which was a trick she should not have found as impressive as she did. "Here," he said, kneeling beside her without invitation or ceremony, and looked at the pump mechanism. He found the problem, a cracked leather washer, in about 2 minutes. "I've got a piece of leather back at the shop. I can fix this tonight. I can take it apart and bring the washer in to be replaced," she said. "I have the leather," he said. "It's no trouble." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was close, closer than he usually was, close enough that she could see the texture of the stubble on his jaw and the small scar at his brow, and his eyes, when he turned to look at her, were the exact color of the creek in the cottonwood shade, and she was suddenly and thoroughly aware of him in a way that alarmed her. She stood up. He stood up. "All right," she said, brushing the dirt from her knees. "Thank you." He brought the replacement washer the next morning and installed it while she made coffee, and she brought 2 cups out to the porch, and he sat with her for a while in the morning cool before the heat settled in, and they talked about whether Redrock needed a school yet, and what it would take to get one, and she said that Agnes Beaumont would be the one to organize it if anyone would, and he laughed and agreed. That laugh was going to be a problem, she decided. She had decided this before, but she was deciding it again with more conviction. She told herself she was honoring the arrangement. 1 season. She was allowing him to be present, to be honest, to be exactly what he appeared to be, and she was keeping herself carefully behind the boundary she had drawn. She was being very reasonable about the whole thing, but there were cracks. There was the afternoon in the second week of June when a line of black clouds came up from the southwest in under an hour, and she was in the south field and the storm hit before she could get back to the house, rain like a wall and lightning cracking the sky open, and she ran for the barn and had barely gotten inside when Cole appeared in the doorway, soaked through, having ridden like hell from his own property when he saw the clouds boiling over her direction. "You're all right," he said, breathing hard, looking her over. "I'm fine," she said. "I was already in the barn." He stood in the barn doorway in the rain, dripping, catching his breath, and she thought about the fact that he had ridden hard across 2 miles of storm to make sure she was all right, and she thought about Thomas, who had never ridden anywhere for her, who had always required that she come to him, and the contrast was so stark and so complete that it knocked the breath from her. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "Why did you come?" she said. "You knew I was probably fine." He was quiet for a moment while the rain hammered the barn roof. "Because probably is not certainly," he said. "And I would rather ride 2 miles in the rain and find you fine than stay dry and not know." The barn smelled of hay and rain and warm horse, and the lightning moved east and the thunder rolled after it. And Clara stood there looking at this drenched cowboy who had ridden through a storm for her probably, and felt the crack in her wall widen significantly. They waited out the rain together, sitting on hay bales while Biscuit stood peaceful in her stall, and they talked, and then they stopped talking and were just quiet together, which Clara found was somehow more intimate than the talking, and she was aware of the warmth of him at her shoulder and the sound of his breathing and the rain softening on the roof, and she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, that she was in serious danger. She told herself she had the whole summer. July arrived with the heat Cole had promised, a deep, dry, pressing heat that settled over Redrock like a blanket and did not lift. Clara's crops needed water twice daily, and she managed it, rising before dawn to irrigate before the sun rose high enough to bake the moisture from the soil. Her kitchen garden was producing already, tomatoes and beans and squash, and she had begun drying herbs on the porch rail and putting up preserves against the winter. The house had begun to feel like her house, the way a place does when you have worked it hard enough and long enough, when it knows your footsteps. Cole took her to town one Saturday in July for what was apparently Redrock's annual Independence Day celebration, a week late due to a cattle emergency that had kept everyone occupied on the 4th. There was a long table of food set up in the square in front of the church, contributed by every household in town. A fiddle player named Dietz who was old and fierce and played like a house on fire, and enough good humor in the assembled crowd of perhaps 150 people to make the July heat briefly irrelevant. Cole introduced her to people she had not yet met, the Garza family who ran the livery, old Judge Merchant who was retired and spent his days fishing the creek, a young couple named Abner and Pearl Sutton who had the farm south of town, and who were so visibly, comfortably happy together that Clara found it difficult to look at them too directly. Agnes Beaumont watched Cole and Clara together with the expression of a woman who has done significant work and is now watching the result develop correctly. They danced. Clara had not danced in years and had not expected to tonight, but there was Dietz with his fiddle, and there was Cole with his hand out, and his expression so carefully neutral that she could see what the careful neutrality was covering, and she put her hand in his, and they danced to a Virginia reel in the dusty town square of Redrock, Texas, in the summer of 1882, and she laughed when she turned wrong and he caught her elbow and laughed too, and she thought that she had not laughed like that in a very, very long time. His hand at her waist was warm and steady. When the music slowed, they slowed with it, and she was aware of every point of contact between them with a precision that made it difficult to think about anything else. His eyes when he looked down at her were serious and soft at once. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, and his voice was low, meant only for her. "Yes," she said, and was surprised by how fully she meant it. "I am." He smiled, and it reached all the way to those Creekwater eyes, and she thought, quite suddenly and with terrible clarity, that she was not safely behind any wall at all. She was standing directly in the middle of the danger she had been trying to avoid, and it did not feel like danger at this particular moment. It felt like standing in the wildflower flat, like something beautiful that she had not expected to find. She did not let herself examine that thought until she was home and Biscuit was stabled, and the house was dark, and she was lying in her narrow bed looking at the ceiling, and then she examined it very thoroughly. She thought about Thomas, the specific weight of that grief, the specific shame of having been so completely wrong about a person. She thought about what it had cost her, the savings, yes, which had been bad, but more than that, the faith, the willingness to be open, the part of herself that had believed in something larger than practical survival. Thomas had taken that when he went. She lay in the dark and asked herself honestly, was Cole Danner what he appeared to be? She thought about 5 weeks of close observation, of the way he treated his ranch hands, of the way he spoke about his neighbors, the Garza family, the Suttons, of the way he had told her plainly and without embellishment about his own history and what it contained. She thought about the storm. She thought about his hands catching the flour sack before it hit the ground and replacing the leather washer and fixing the fence, none of it asked for, none of it accompanied by expectation or performance, all of it simply given. She thought about him saying, "Give me one season, not give me your heart, not trust me completely, just let me be here, let me be real, see what you think." That was not what Thomas had done. Thomas had asked for everything immediately, had insisted on being the center of her world before she had had the opportunity to understand what kind of person he was. Cole was doing the opposite. He was patient in the way that the land was patient, without impatience, without agenda, simply present and consistent. She was not over her wall. She was not ready to say the things she could feel building in her chest. But she thought, lying in the dark in her house that had become her home, that maybe she was beginning to believe, not in love in the abstract, not in the grand romantic declarations that had undone her before, but in this specific person, in this specific quiet truth that was being laid in front of her one day at a time. August was the hardest month, as Cole had warned her it would be. The heat reached a pitch that baked the soil to something approaching ceramic and turned the creek shallow and warm. 2 of her bean rows died despite everything she did, and she lost a portion of her squash to some kind of blight that moved through the plants overnight. She sat on her porch the morning she discovered it and felt the familiar drop of a person whose survival depends on what they can grow, the cold mathematics of a bad harvest. Cole came over that afternoon. He looked at the squash, walked the rows, said nothing critical. "It's the drought," he said. "It hit Abner Sutton's south field too. Most years this does not happen." "Most years is not useful to me this year," she said, and she heard the edge in her voice and did not apologize for it. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her carefully. "What do you need?" "I need the squash not to be dead," she said. He almost smiled. "What can actually be done?" She let out a long breath. "I need to expand the tomato rows and get another crop of beans started before it gets too late in the season. I need more water on the remaining kitchen garden. And I need to figure out what I'm going to sell at market to make up what the squash would have brought. I'll bring Pete and Ramon tomorrow morning," he said. "We can get new beds turned and the tomatoes extended in a day." She looked at him. "Cole, I cannot keep accepting your help without giving something back." "You have given something back," he said. "What have I given you?" He held her gaze. "Clara," he said quietly, "the past 2 months have been the best 2 months I have had in a very long time. That is not nothing." The words settled over her like warm water. She was not ready to say what she felt back to him, but she thought he deserved honesty in return for his own. "The same is true for me," she said carefully. "Whatever I said in May on this porch, whatever I still believe about love in the general sense, the particular fact of knowing you has been very good." He was quiet for a moment, and she saw what those words did to him, the way something in him relaxed, the way his shoulders settled. He nodded. "Tomorrow morning, then," he said. "Yes," she said. They worked the field together the next day, all 4 of them, Cole and Pete and Ramon and Clara, and she worked as hard as any of them, and they treated her accordingly, which she appreciated. Ramon sang a corrido while he worked, something fast and cheerful in Spanish, and Pete harmonized unexpectedly in a deep bass that made everyone laugh. They finished by early afternoon and sat in the shade of the barn and ate the lunch Clara had made, beans and cornbread and sliced tomatoes with salt, and it felt, that afternoon, like something that had its own kind of rightness to it, a small community, people working together, the particular satisfaction of effort shared. She caught Cole looking at her across the lunch circle, and he did not look away, and she did not look away either. It was only a moment. But it was the kind of moment that meant something. It was a Friday evening in the second week of August when everything that had been slowly, carefully building between them finally broke its banks. She had ridden over to his ranch for the first time, something she had not done before, always having met him on her own land or in town. She had gone because his horse, a big gray named Asher that she had heard about extensively, had apparently thrown a shoe on rocky ground, and she had some experience with horses, and had simply decided to ride over and see if she could help. That was the reason she gave herself, and she held to it while she was on the road, and it got significantly less convincing the moment she arrived in the yard of his ranch and saw the place. It was not large, but it was well kept and beautiful in the functional way of things built by a person who cares about their work. The main house was a solid structure of limestone and cedar, 2 rooms wide and deep, with a covered porch that ran the full length of the front. There were 3 outbuildings, a large barn, a smaller tack and tool shed, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. The yard was swept clean, the fence lines were straight, and there was a kitchen garden on the south side of the house that was, she noted with some amusement, in better shape than her own. Cole came out of the barn when he heard her ride in, looking surprised and pleased in equal measure. "Clara," he said. "I heard about Asher," she said, dismounting. "I know something about this." He showed her to the barn. Asher was a big, elegant, calm gray horse, and Clara examined the hoof, found the problem, and helped Cole stabilize it while the blacksmith could be arranged. While they worked, side by side in the warm barn, she was aware of him in the close, specific, undeniable way she had been aware of him since the storm, and she thought that she had been being very patient with herself, and that patience was becoming difficult. When they came out of the barn in the long golden light of the August evening, he asked her if she would stay for supper. She said yes before she had decided to. Pete and Ramon were eating in the bunkhouse, so it was the 2 of them at the table inside Cole's limestone house, and she looked around at the interior while he cooked, which was plain and clean and honest. A few books on a shelf, a good iron stove, a cedar table worn smooth by years of elbows, a rocking chair by the window. There was a small framed photograph on the shelf between the books, and she moved close enough to see it. A man and a woman, older, in formal dress, the kind of photograph that required effort and occasion. "Your parents?" she asked. "My mother and my father," he said from the stove. "Before he got sick. The only photograph they ever had taken." "They look kind," she said. "They were," he said. "Both of them." She set the table while he finished cooking because she was not the kind of person who watched others work, and they ate his cooking, which turned out to be simple and good, salt pork and potatoes, and the last of some dried apricots he had got at the general store, and they talked through the meal and then talked after it, sitting across from each other at the worn cedar table with the evening coming blue through the windows. He asked her about Missouri, about her life before Redrock. She had not talked about Thomas to anyone in Redrock except the necessary minimum, and she found that she talked about it now. Not everything, but the shape of it, the man she had thought she was building a life with, the discovery of what he actually was, which was a person who made promises he had no intention of keeping, and who had borrowed money from her with a story about a business venture that existed entirely in his imagination. She told Cole about the funeral, about the strange position of mourning a man she was also furious with, about the way grief and betrayal had gotten so tangled together that she could not separate them, and how that tangle had resolved itself into a single clear decision. She would trust herself, her land, her work, and nothing else. Cole listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He stole from you." "In every sense," she said. "He should not have done that," Cole said. He said it quietly, without heat, but with a conviction so absolute that it landed differently than anger would have. "You deserved better than that." "I know that," she said. "Do you?" he said. "Because sometimes people who have been treated badly by someone they trusted start to wonder if they invited it somehow, start to think they should have known." She looked at him carefully. "You are perceptive," she said. "I am not perceptive," he said. "I just pay attention to what is in front of me." "That is the same thing," she said. He looked at her across the table with those shifting, honest eyes, and she thought that the wall was not down exactly, but it was no longer really standing either, and that perhaps that was all right, and perhaps she had known for some time that it was going to be all right and had simply been waiting for a moment that felt safe enough to admit it. "Cole," she said. "Yes," he said. "I think," she said, and then stopped, because the words that were coming up were large ones and she wanted to be sure of them, and she looked down at her hands on the worn table and then looked up at him. "I think that I was wrong about love," she said, "not about what happened to me. That was real and it was bad, but about whether it was possible for something different to exist. I was wrong about that." He was very still. "I am not finished being frightened," she said, "and I am not ready to say everything that I feel because I am still learning what I feel and I want to be sure of myself before I am sure of you. But I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that something has changed." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and his hand was warm and solid, and the touch was gentle in a way she had not expected from hands that size. And he said nothing, and that was exactly right. She rode home in the dark, and the stars over West Texas were extraordinary, more stars than sky, and she felt for the first time in a long time like the world was vast and full of possibility rather than vast and indifferent. She felt like a person who had begun to thaw, and while thawing was not always comfortable, she was glad of it. September came, and with it, the first suggestion of autumn, a change in the quality of the light and the smell of the air, something crisper and cleaner at the edges of the days. Clara's tomatoes were in full production, more than she had expected after the difficult August, and she spent long mornings canning and drying and making preparations for winter, with a satisfaction that was both practical and emotional, the satisfaction of a person who has made something from very little through their own effort. She rode into town one September morning to sell canned goods and preserves at the market that set up on Saturday mornings outside the general store. She sold almost everything she brought within the first 2 hours, largely on the strength of Mrs. Garza's endorsement, which it turned out carried considerable weight in Red Rock, and she came home with more money in her pocket than she had expected, and a feeling of rightness about her situation that was unlike anything she had felt since before Thomas. Cole was waiting on her porch when she got back, which surprised her until she saw that he was not sitting idle but had been repairing the loose board on the third porch step while he waited. He looked up when Biscuit came into the yard. "Good market," he said. "Very good," she said, and she was smiling and she let herself smile. He stood up, and she was struck again, as she frequently was, by the simple physical fact of him, the size and the ease and the particular quality of his attention when he looked at her. She had learned in the past months that Cole Danner looked at the world carefully, and at her especially carefully, not in a way that felt like scrutiny but in a way that felt like care. "I came by to ask you something," he said, "and then I saw the step and thought I would be useful while I waited." "You are always useful," she said, coming up onto the porch and sitting in the porch chair, suddenly tired from the market morning in a good way. "What is it you wanted to ask?" He turned the hammer in his hands, which she recognized now as his equivalent of a nervous gesture, and he looked at her with a directness that told her this was important. "Summer is ending," he said. "Yes," she said. "The season," he said. She understood. "The season," she said softly. "I told you one season," he said, "and the season is nearly done. And I told you I would respect whatever you felt at the end of it." He paused. "I need to know what you feel, Clara. Because what I feel is very clear to me, and I am not going to be anything but honest with you about that. But I also need to know where you are before I say it, because you asked me from the beginning to follow your pace, and I intend to honor that." She looked at him for a long time. The autumn light was thin and golden on the yard, and Biscuit was pulling at the hitching post looking for something to eat, and a mockingbird was singing its complicated song from the mesquite tree, and the world was quiet and full, and she was sitting on her own porch on her own land with a man who had spent 4 months being exactly, and only what he said he was. "I went through something that nearly convinced me that I was not meant for this," she said. "That love was something I did not have the sense to navigate safely. I built a wall and I meant to keep it, and then a very stubborn cowboy asked for one season and I let him in the gate." She stopped. She took a breath. "What I feel, Cole Danner, is that the wall is gone, not damaged, not cracked, gone, and I am standing in a field without it, and I am not afraid. I thought I would be afraid. I thought losing the wall would feel like losing shelter. It does not. It feels like standing in that wildflower flat the first morning, like something that is worth finding." He had set down the hammer very carefully at some point during this speech, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something open and unguarded and enormous, and she realized that Cole Danner, who showed his feelings through action and patience and steady presence, was not a man who cried easily, but his eyes were bright. "I love you," he said. "That is what I needed to say. I love you, Clara. I have since about the 3rd week of May, and I have been very patient about it." She laughed, and it came out bright and real and slightly trembling. "You have been extraordinarily patient," she said. He crossed the porch in 2 strides, and she stood up from her chair to meet him, and he cupped her face in both his large, careful hands, and he kissed her. And it was nothing like she had expected, and everything she could have wanted, gentle and thorough and entirely serious. The kind of kiss that was a statement and a promise at once. When they separated, she kept her hands on his arms and looked up at him, and the mockingbird was still singing and the afternoon was golden around them, and she said, "I love you too. I want you to know that I am not guessing. I know it." "Good," he said, and he kissed her again, and this one was less gentle, and she did not mind that at all. There were things to be navigated after that, because love in real life is not only declarations on porches. It is also the practical business of 2 people whose lives have grown adjacent, deciding how those lives are going to grow together. They navigated them carefully and honestly and without rushing, which suited them both. He asked her to marry him in October, on a Saturday morning when they were riding the fence line between their 2 properties, and the mesquite had gone gold, and the sky was a blue so deep it almost hurt to look at. He had a ring from his mother's estate, a simple gold band with a small garnet that had traveled from Arkansas in the bottom of a worn leather satchel. He told her the history of it, which took about 2 minutes, and then he asked her. She said yes. She said it clearly and without hesitation, which surprised her slightly, and which she thought was, in the end, the best evidence that something real had happened to her over the course of one Texas summer. They were married in November in the Reed-Rock church with the crooked steeple, on a clear, cold morning when the sky was the color of a robin's egg, and the whole town came. Agnes Beaumont wept with satisfaction and claimed later that she had known from the moment Clara stepped off the stagecoach that something important was going to happen, which was not entirely accurate but which Clara allowed her, generously. Ramon played guitar at the reception, something warm and sweet that made the assembled guests move a little where they stood. Pete Walters ate 4 pieces of wedding cake and apologized to no one. Cole stood at the altar with his hat in his hands and watched her walk down the aisle on her own, because that was how she had wanted it, no one giving her to anyone, she coming of her own free will, and his eyes did not leave her face the whole length of the church, and his expression was so nakedly full of love that even Judge Merchant, who was old and had seen a great deal, had to look away. They spoke their vows plainly and seriously and meant every word. They came out of the church into the November sunshine, and the town cheered, and Agnes threw dried flower petals, and Clara stood on the church steps with her hand in Cole's, and thought about the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 8 months ago, the closed, careful, convinced woman with her trunk and her list and her wall, and she thought she would have to thank that woman for being brave enough to get on the stage at all, for being practical enough to come to Reed-Rock rather than somewhere else, for saying yes to wildflowers, even when she meant to say no to everything. They settled into their life together with the same honest practicality with which they had built everything between them. The question of where to live was not a difficult one. They would work both properties, Cole's ranch and Clara's farm, which together made for a substantially viable operation. Clara kept her deed in her own name. Cole understood without being asked why this mattered to her and never questioned it. She brought her canning and her market operation to bear on the household economy with considerable effect, and by spring they were doing well, not wealthy, but solid, the kind of solid that lets you sleep without worry and look forward rather than only sideways. She also discovered that Cole's kitchen garden, which she had admired the previous August, had been somewhat optimistically maintained, and she took it over with results that pleased them both. Ramon stayed on as a permanent hand, and his family, his mother and two sisters, came up from South Texas in the spring, and Clara helped them get settled in a small house on the edge of Reed Rock with the particular efficiency of a woman who understood exactly what it was to arrive somewhere new and need a hand. The Danner Hennessy household became, over time, the kind of place where people gathered, for the practicality of it, for the good food, for the ease of the company. Agnes Beaumont had Sunday dinner with them once a month and never stopped being delighted with herself. Spring came around again, the second one Clara had seen in Reed Rock, and she stood in the south field on a morning in April with the sun just getting warm and the bluebonnets beginning to show along the fence line, and she thought about what a season had turned out to contain. A whole life was what? A whole reshaping of what she had believed to be permanently true. It was also in April that she told Cole she was expecting a child, on a quiet evening when they were sitting on what was now their porch, the lamp lit inside behind them and the spring night warm and soft. She told him plainly as she told him everything, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he got up from his chair and went down on his knee in front of her, not to propose anything. He had already done that, but simply to be at her level, and he took both her hands and held them. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "A little," she said. "Yes. Me too," he said. "That makes sense." She laughed. She loved that he did not tell her there was nothing to be afraid of. She loved that he was frightened too and said so. She loved him, this honest, patient, stubborn cowboy who had sat on her fence post and asked for one season and changed everything. "A little frightened seems appropriate," she said. "It is a large thing." "It is," he agreed, "and we will do it well." "How do you know?" she said. "Because we do everything well," he said. "Together," he paused. "Separately, we are also reasonably capable, but together we are extremely competent." She laughed again and pulled his hands toward her. "Get back up in your chair," she said. "That ground is damp." He came back up in his chair, and they sat together in the warm April night with the knowledge of the new thing between them. And the mockingbird sang from the mesquite tree, as it always did. Their son was born in November, on a cold, clear morning that smelled of frost and cedar, in the bedroom of the limestone house that had become home in the fullest sense of the word. He was a large, loud, healthy baby, and he arrived into the world with the same no-nonsense energy that characterized both his parents, which everyone who was present felt was appropriate. They named him James, for Clara's uncle who had left her the land that had brought her to Reed Rock in the first place, and middle named him Cole, which the senior Cole protested mildly and then did not argue further because Clara had made up her mind. James Cole Danner was, from his first weeks, the most interesting thing that had ever happened to either of his parents, and they said this to each other without embarrassment, the way you can say things without embarrassment when you are talking to the person who knows you completely. Pete Walters held the baby with the extreme care of a very large man who is terrified of very small things, and announced that the baby looked like a future cattleman. Ramon said the baby looked like a future musician and began singing to him immediately, and James appeared to agree with Ramon, settling every time the guitar came out. Agnes Beaumont held him and wept, which was not a surprise, and said he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, which she said about all babies but which felt true. Winter passed softly around the family, and Clara recovered her strength with the same practical determination she brought to everything, and the house was warm and full of the new sounds of an infant. And Cole, who had not spent much time considering what fatherhood would feel like, found that it felt like the most natural and serious undertaking of his life, and that he was better at it than he had feared and more moved by it than he had anticipated. He came in one night from the late feeding of the cattle to find Clara in the rocking chair with James asleep on her chest, her own eyes half closed, the lamp turned low, and he stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at them. This woman and this child, this life that had grown from a single season and a held-out hand, and enough patience to wait for someone to find their way back to believing. He thought about the woman on the porch in May, the closed, careful woman with her folded arms and her honest, sad eyes. He thought about what she had said, "I do not believe in love anymore." He thought about the absolute certainty with which she had said it, and the absolute truth of it at that moment, and the equally absolute truth of where they were now. He crossed the room quietly and sat on the edge of the footstool near the rocking chair, and Clara opened her eyes and looked at him with the warm, unhurried look she had developed sometime in the middle of their first summer together, the look that was entirely without defense. "He's been asleep for an hour," she whispered. "I don't want to move him." "Then don't," he whispered back. They stayed like that, the three of them in the quiet lamplit room, while the winter moved around the house outside and the fire in the iron stove settled and ticked, and everything was exactly and completely what it was supposed to be. The second spring came with a vigor that seemed personal, the wildflowers extending further than ever across the flat where Cole had taken Clara that first May morning, the bluebonnets so thick in places that riding through them felt like wading through blue water. Clara took James out there on Biscuit when he was 4 months old and too young to fully see, but she wanted to go and she brought him with her. And she sat on her horse in the middle of all that blue and red and yellow and held her son against her chest and thought that the world was unreasonably, impractically beautiful, and she was so grateful to be in it. Cole rode beside her, not saying anything because he did not need to. They had talked, in the intervening months, about the future with the same practical honesty they brought to everything. About the land, both properties working in tandem now, about the market and the cattle and the possibility of eventually adding a small dairy operation that Clara thought would be worth the effort. About James, about who he would be and what they hoped for him and the particular responsibility and joy of raising a child to be a decent person in a complicated world. About the world itself, which in 1883 was still raw and in the process of becoming, with all the injustice and possibility that implied, the ongoing dispossession of native peoples from their land, the precarious situation of Mexican families in Texas like Ramon's, the slow and incomplete reconstruction of what it meant to live in the post-war South, none of it resolved, all of it present. Clara felt these things with the same sharpness she felt everything, and she expressed them the same way she expressed everything, clearly and without softening. Cole listened and held his own views with care, and was not a man who shied from difficult considerations. They were, in this as in other things, well matched. Ramon's family prospered in Reed-Rock, his sister Alina becoming, by the following year, one of the more sought-after seamstresses in town, which Agnes Beaumont credited to her own patronage, not inaccurately. Pete Walters, who turned out to have a somewhat different life story than his size and silence suggested, saved enough to buy a small parcel of land east of town and began working it in the evenings after his duties at the ranch. Cole gave him a horse outright for the purpose and told him it was an investment in a future neighbor, which was not entirely untrue. The town of Reed-Rock itself grew slowly and steadily through 1883, as towns along the Texas frontier tended to do. A school was established, as Clara had predicted Agnes would manage, in a repurposed building that had formerly been a dry goods warehouse, with a young teacher brought from San Antonio named Miss Pruitt, who was energetic and dedicated, and who Clara immediately befriended and provided with preserves. Sheriff Harlan Cross continued to run a firm and fair operation and was re-elected without significant opposition. Life in Reed-Rock was not without its difficulties. The summer of 1883 brought another drought, harder than the previous one, and the cattle market dipped badly. There were months when the mathematics were very tight, and Clara and Cole sat at the kitchen table with the account books spread between them, and worked the numbers with the focused intensity of people who understand that the land does not make promises. They made it through. They made it through by working and by refusing to panic and by being honest with each other about what they had and what they could do. There was an afternoon that August when Cole came in from a long day working cattle in the heat, looking tired in a way that went beyond the body, tired in the spirit, and Clara saw it and she said nothing for a moment, just put food in front of him and sat across from him, and when he had eaten she said, "Tell me." He told her, all of it. The worry about the market, a small but real fear about whether the spread was going to make it through if the drought went another season, a deeper and more private fear about whether he was doing enough, being enough, providing enough. He told her in the plain way he told her everything, without drama but without minimizing, and she listened to all of it the same way he had always listened to her. When he was done, she said, "We have 147 jars of canned goods in this pantry. I have already contracted with the Garza family to sell winter vegetables to the hotel starting in September. I spoke with Mr. Pratt about a credit extension last week, which he granted without argument because we have never been late in 2 years of dealings. We have money in the jar under the kitchen floorboard that you think I don't know about." He looked at her. "You know about the jar." "I have always known about the jar," she said. "I respected that you had it. Everyone needs something that is entirely their own." She reached across the table and put her hand on his forearm. "We are going to be all right," she said. "I know how to survive hard seasons. I have been doing it my whole life, and now I don't have to do it alone." He turned his arm over and held her hand. "Neither do I," he said. "No," she said. "Neither do you." The drought broke in September with 3 days of steady rain that filled the creek and darkened the soil and brought the scrub grass back to green. And Cole stood on the porch in the rain and laughed like a man reprieved. And Clara stood beside him and let the rain come down on both of them. And James, a sturdy 10-month-old at this point, banged his hands on the porch boards with great enthusiasm for the water falling from the sky. They had a neighbor over for supper that evening, an unusual event given that it was a weeknight, just to celebrate. Agnes Beaumont brought a pie. Ramon brought his guitar. Pete Walters brought his large, steady presence and a profound appetite. They ate and talked and laughed about the summer with the relief of people who have come through something real. And James went to sleep on Ramon's lap while the guitar played, which had become his preferred sleeping arrangement when Ramon was present, to everyone's amusement. There was one more thing that Clara had been carrying through the summer that she had not said, and she said it that night after everyone had gone home and James was in his cradle, and the house was quiet and she and Cole were doing the last of the dishes together, which they always did together, one washing and one drying, not out of principle, but simply because it was how they had started and neither of them had seen a reason to change it. "I want to tell you something," she said, handing him a plate. "All right," he said. "I was thinking about what I said on the porch in May of last year," she said. "When you came and asked if I would ride to see the wildflowers and I told you I did not believe in love anymore." "I remember," he said. "I believed it completely when I said it," she said. "I want you to understand that. It was not a challenge or a test or something I said to see what you would do. I genuinely believed it. Love had been something that hurt me and I had decided to be done with it." "I know," he said. "I also want you to understand," she said, "that what you said, 'Give me one season,' that was the exact right thing to say. Not because it was clever or strategic, but because it was honest. You did not tell me I was wrong. You did not try to argue me out of what I felt. You just asked for the chance to be present, to be real, to let time do what time does when people are honest with each other." She dried her hands on the towel. "I think if you had said anything else I would have closed the door." Cole set down the dish he was drying and looked at her. "I did not know what else to say," he said. "I only knew what I could honestly offer. I couldn't promise you that love was worth it in the abstract. I could only ask you to see what this particular version of it felt like. This particular version of it, she said, feels like the most real thing I have ever known. He came to her in the kitchen, pulled her close, and held her in the way he had learned to hold her, one arm around her back and his hand in her hair, thoroughly and without haste, and she put her face against his shoulder, and they stood together in the kitchen of their home while the lamp burned low, and the night settled over Rock, Texas, and everything was where it was supposed to be. The winter of 1883 was mild, and the spring of 1884 came early and generously, and Clara's south field produced better than it ever had, the soil having built over 2 full seasons of careful tending into something rich and dark and responsive. She added the dairy operation that spring, 2 good cows purchased at market in San Antonio, and the butter and cheese she produced added a substantial and reliable element to their income. She hired Elena Ramon part-time to help with the processing, which suited them both, and added another thread to the web of relationship that had grown around the Danner household over 2 years. In the spring, too, James took his first steps, which he did not do gradually but all at once, going from standing to walking across the entire length of the kitchen in a single determined expedition that ended in his father's arms at the other end, and Clara, who had watched from the doorway, sat down on the kitchen floor laughing. "He is entirely too confident," she said. "He comes by it honestly," Cole said, looking at her over James's head with his eyes warm. "From you," she said. "From you," he said. They were both right. That summer, Clara began teaching reading and arithmetic to Elena and her younger sister Maria on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, something that had started as a casual offer and became, within a month, a serious and regular enterprise. She had discovered that she had a gift for teaching that she had not known she possessed, something patient and practical, and honest that met students where they were without condescension. Agnes Beaumont told Miss Pruitt about it, and Miss Pruitt came to ask if Clara might be willing to assist at the school on a part-time basis, and Clara agreed, because the work pleased her, and because she believed, as she had always believed, that what a person knows is only useful if it is shared. Cole watched all of this with the particular pride of a man who loves someone and keeps finding new reasons to love them more, and he told her so regularly, in the plain way he told her most things, and she received it in the same spirit, which was the spirit of people who have learned to take nothing good for granted. By the time James was 2 years old and walking everywhere with great authority and beginning to speak in short declarative sentences that sounded startlingly like both of his parents, Rock had a school with 31 students, a second blacksmith shop, a doctor, which was a significant development, a woman named Dr. Elena Marsh who had trained in St. Louis and arrived with considerable skill and no patience for being underestimated, and a library of 43 books housed in the back of the post office, which had been Agnes Beaumont's crowning achievement, and which she referred to as the Rock Public Reading Room with complete seriousness. Clara and Cole had a second child in the autumn of 1885, a girl this time, dark-eyed and fierce from her first moments, whom they named Margaret after Cole's mother, and called Maggie immediately because she did not look like a Margaret. She was everything James was not, loud where he was quiet, impulsive where he was deliberate, wildly affectionate where he maintained a certain considered reserve. She was, Cole said, exactly like her mother, which Clara disputed and which everyone else confirmed. James received his sister with the seriousness of a 2-year-old who has been extensively prepared for an event and is not sure it is going according to expectations, but within a week was following Maggie's cradle around offering her things, a wooden block, a smooth river stone he had found, a piece of bread, and by the end of the month had decided she was the most interesting element in the household. Agnes Beaumont held Maggie and wept, consistent in this as in all things. Ramon composed a song for the occasion, which James requested to hear every evening for 3 weeks running. Pete Walters said she looked like a future cattle rancher, and no one contradicted him. The farm and the ranch together were, by 1885, a genuinely thriving operation, not by the standards of the large cattle operations coming into Texas from the east, but by every honest standard of two people who had started with very little and built something real. They were debt-free. They had a winter fund. They had a functioning dairy, a productive field operation, two healthy children, a solid house, good neighbors, and the kind of standing in a community that comes not from wealth or position, but from being consistently trustworthy. They were also, still and continuously, in love. Not the breathless, declarative first-season love, though that was where it had started and they both remembered it with great fondness, but the deeper, quieter, more absolute love that grows between two people who have worked alongside each other through hard seasons and easy ones, who have told each other the truth consistently and received it without flinching, who have built something real together from the ground up and know what it cost and what it is worth. On an evening in the October of 1885, with the children asleep and the autumn night cool and full of stars, Clara and Cole sat on their porch in the chairs they had moved from hers to theirs in the winter after they married, and Cole had his arm around her, and she was leaning into his shoulder in the comfortable, total way of a person who knows exactly where they belong. "Do you remember," she said, "what I said to you that first spring on this porch?" "I remember everything you have ever said to me," he said. She smiled against his shoulder. "I told you I did not believe in love anymore." "You did," he said. "I was wrong," she said. "You were not wrong about what you felt," he said. "You were right about everything you had experienced." "You are very fair," she said. "I am trying to be accurate," he said. "There is a difference." She looked up at him. In the starlight, his face was older than the face of the man who had stood in her yard with a borrowed horse and plain speech, and an offer of time, 3 years older, with new lines at the corners of his eyes and gray beginning at his temples, and she thought he was the most beautiful person she had ever seen, in the specific way that people become beautiful when you have loved them long enough to see past their appearance into what they actually are. "Give me 1 season," she said, quoting him back to himself softly. He said, "I recall saying that. It was the right thing to say. It was the only honest thing I could offer," he said. "I told you I did not know what else to say. You said it was the truth, that you could only show me what was real." She was quiet for a moment. "You gave me 1 season and it became every season after that." "That was the idea," he said, and she could feel him smiling. She settled back against his shoulder. The night was very quiet and very large and very full of stars. Somewhere out in the dark a coyote sent up its wavering call, and the mesquite tree in the yard moved slightly in the cool air, and the house behind them was warm and solid and held their children and their life. "Cole," she said. "Clara," he said. "I love you," she said. "I know," he said. "I love you too. That has not changed." "It won't," she said. "Not a question. Just a fact, stated the way he stated facts, plainly and without embellishment, because it was true and because they both knew it, and because that was enough and more than enough and everything." The stars moved their slow circuit over West Texas, over Red Rock, over the limestone house on the merged land of the Danner-Hennessy spread, over the 2 sleeping children and the pair of good cattle horses in the barn, and the kitchen garden that produced better every year, and the canning pantry that never went empty, and the cedar table worn smooth by years of good use, and the 2 people on the porch who had arrived at this life by different roads and through different kinds of hardship, and had found it to be, when they got here, exactly right. There are people who will tell you that love is a gamble, that it asks too much and pays too unpredictably, that the sensible thing is to keep your walls high and your expectations modest. Clara Hennessy had believed all of that with her whole heart in the spring of 1882, and she had not been wrong to believe it based on what she knew then, and she did not fault herself for any of it. But she also knew, with the same honest certainty with which she knew everything she knew well, that the wall coming down had not destroyed her. It had completed her. Not because she needed another person to be whole. She had proved in her first Redrock spring that she was entirely capable on her own, but because this particular person had shown her, one honest season at a time, that love in its real form was nothing like what had been done to her before. That real love looked like a man in the rain making sure you were all right. That it looked like a flour sack caught before it hit the ground. Like a borrowed horse named Biscuit. Like a worn cedar table and 2 cups of coffee in the morning cool. Like someone who listened to you the same way you listened to the land, carefully, and without assuming they already knew what you were going to say. She had not believed in love anymore. And then a cowboy had said, "Give me 1 season," and everything that came after was the answer to that. She pulled Cole's arm tighter around her and watched the stars, and the night was perfect and full, and tomorrow there would be work to do and children to feed and animals to tend and seasons to get through, and she would do all of it and she would do it well, and she would not do it alone, and that was the whole story, and it was more than enough.